Hello, everybody. This is Harold Buchanan. As you can see by the name at the bottom of my box, also in front of the new SD-HistCon T-shirts for your perusal admiration, and I'll also put a place out where you can order one if you haven't already. So this is one of I guess this is the third of 4 SD-HistCon exclusive panels. And we record these, of course, for the attendees pre-con, and everybody's welcome to come and talk and chat and be a part of this. But we have an excellent panel today, and I'm going to turn it over to the Master of Ceremonies, Mr. Dan Thurot.
Thanks, Harold, and thank you for the invitation. I'm especially excited to have this conversation because I think that we have a tremendous community here that is unusually thoughtful about some of the concerns and some of the philosophical concerns and some of the mundane concerns that are going on right now around the notion of generative artificial intelligence. So we've asked some people to chat with us today, and for the most part, I actually want to fade into the background. So I would like to introduce some very talented people who we have here with us to talk. And for the most part, I don't think actually any of these people need introduction. So I actually am hoping that we'll introduce ourselves in the sense of why do we maybe have something to say about this topic? So just to introduce myself, my name, as you've heard, is Dan Thurot. You have no reason to know who I am. But I have a background in history. I write about history. I teach at the university level. But before that, I actually pursued a master's degree in the philosophy of ethics, including things like bioethics and the ethics of aesthetics, which is a bit of a tongue twister to say aesthetics ethics, but that's something that we would do in that field. Now, I am the least qualified out of everybody here to talk. So first, I would like to introduce and have everybody, as I go through, please just spend 30 seconds telling us what your qualifications are and what you're hoping to get out of this panel. Why don't we start with you, Dr. Liz Davidson?
I never mute myself. Hi, I am Liz Davidson. I have a YouTube channel and podcast called Beyond Solitaire, and I spend a lot of my time thinking about games as art and games as expressions of history, and games as, a way for people to communicate with each other. And so I think it's really important to think about the implications of bringing computers into that conversation, if it can be so called when there's a computer involved. I also am I'm an educator, and so for me, talking about AI is very much of the essence because I have students who are trying to use it. I have colleagues who are trying to find ways to make that okay, and then colleagues who don't find that okay. And so I feel like I'm not an artist, but AI, ChatGPT, those aspects of technology now are part of my life too, and I want to explore that with other thoughtful people.
Thanks, Liz. Jason, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
I'm a little bit redundant here, Dan. I went to college. I got my degree in philosophical ethics as well. So I'm interested in really the personhood aspect of it. Like, what is a person? And because that's a huge question, because like, okay, how do we regard computers as people? Like, I think the claim is going to be like, well, computers do it. They're creating, humans create. What's the difference? We can talk about some of that. So there's some philosophical insights there. And also, more recently, I have looked at this through the lens of labor. And what is this going to do to the artist career? And are we going to come out of this with more jobs? Are we going to come out of this with better jobs? Or are the fears justified and we're, kind of headed towards, serving the billionaire class? So those double ends are what I'm interested in.
Thanks so much, Jason. We're also very grateful that we could be joined today by someone whose art I am especially interested in recently because I've been playing a game that he has designed and art that he has created Pablo, thank you so much for staying up late. Will you please tell us a little bit about yourself and why you're interested in this conversation?
Sure. So I'm a freelance artist, and I've worked in the fields of video games, AAA video games, and animation for the last 15 years. So I've got a vested interest in this for sure. And I'm also the illustrator behind a game called The Old King's Crown. I also designed it. And yeah, I'm really interested to hear this conversation. I have some opinions about it, obviously. But I'll keep my language, nice and level.
Very good. If you struggle, don't worry. I'm sure that Harold can bleep us. And last but certainly least, and that was not a stutter, Cole, I think that you are probably the least known person on here. So why don't you force your way into the conversation and tell us how did you get included on this panel?
I'm neither an ethicist nor an artist, so it's clearly some oversight.
Awkward.
But I'm a great imposter, which is also what this is about. My name is Cole Wehrle. I'm the creative director at Leader Games. I've designed a whole heap of games and also the co-founder of Whirligig Games. Before that, though, when I was at the University of Texas, I taught rhetoric for many years, where there were fierce debates about whether or not we should be submitting our students' papers to cheat analyzing bots. And it's interesting to see those things kind of come to roost now. And in my capacity as creative director at Leader Games, I spend a lot of my time thinking about the allocation of artists and the way we spend our creative labor and how we conduct our business, and have been thinking about the ways in which different kinds of artificial intelligence platforms have started, worming their way into our workflows. And that's from certainly generative images, but also Magic Eye, the magic wand tool in Photoshop, which appears to be getting suspiciously better every single day. And so these are issues that matter a lot more than just Midjourney, and I'm interested to hear the discussion today.
Thank you all. So where I wanted to begin is I wanted to begin with something a little mundane. And I don't mean mundane in the sense that it doesn't matter. In fact, I mean mundane in the sense that it does matter. Because there are a lot of philosophical things we can discuss. And as Jason can tell you, ethicists, we can get lost in the weeds forever. And I want to talk about some of the things like personhood and learning and replacing people. But before that, I actually want to talk about the day-to-day material realities that we're facing for artists, people like Pablo here. Because I think even if artificial intelligence, even if this art that we're producing very easily and quickly, even if we were to say it's a good thing, I think we have to acknowledge that it presents some very real and unsettling challenges to millions of people that could upset their day-to-day lives, their livelihoods, even their sense of self. So I want to begin there. Why don't we talk a little bit about the impact that we're already seeing generative AI pose for people who are freelance or company artists? What do we have to say? Did you want to start, Jason?
Sure. So I look at the lens of labor. So like that's as real as it gets, right? Getting paid and working and everything. And it's a mixed bag. And I think that there's going to be an instinct, because I think we're fairly left-leaning people on this place, to be skeptical, and I am, believe me, that's the bias there. But I'm looking at taking the broad sweep of things, and on the positive end, there are designers who are able to use generative AI to gussy up their prototypes and unlock for people, because guess what? Art matters. And if they're able to, get a good looking prototype in front of people, in front of publishers, it helps them. It helps the creative process, etc. It has helped individual artists. So people who are AI tools have been with us a couple of years. Like, there's AI tool in Photoshop and Adobe, and there's people the DALL-E and the Stable Diffusions came recently, but like AI is not. This isn't new, right? I mean, it's been developed. So artists who are working and who are conversant in the language can use it and to gussy up their work. And I think it works best as supplemental. So you're going to hear a lot of those stories. And then you have the other side, the controversy with Essen. Essen used AI in order to create their their advertisements and everything. And I think some people could, hey, that's weird, and then most of us just kind of like pass it on. But then it came out, it's like, oh, this is whatever. And those were artists that were not paid to do the art that would normally have been paid. And we have, you just look around. There's just this instinct, not just with art, but with content in general. It's cheaper to just kind of like, put out content. If we reduce art to content, well, then the computer can do the content cheaper. So that becomes a more philosophical question of, okay, what is content? What is art, etc. But we live in this world where art is content, and who can do it cheaper? Who can do it faster? So there is a very real kind of tsunami coming. And the question is, as I said at the beginning, how is it all going to come out in the wash? But I think since you asked the question, but the mundane question now, I still think there's still kind of a mixed bag, so to speak. But I think the threat is very real, so it's worth a conversation or 10 about it.
Well, maybe we can do one today. Now, of course, one of the reasons I'm so grateful that Pablo is here is because we have somebody who I feel might have an opinion. He has indicated maybe he will say some curse words at us. I would love to get your thoughts on that, Pablo, as someone whose boots are on the ground, so to speak.
Yeah, so there is a lot to unpack, and there's a lot even in that opening statement that you were saying there, Jason, which is great. It's a good summary of it, and you're totally right. There are a bunch of tools that already exist and are integrated into processes. How each generation goes through these epochs of new technology. And I think we're maybe living through a period of time where it's getting faster and faster and faster. But yeah, just as graphic designers had to come to terms with no longer typesetting by hand, but allowing a computer to do it, and that's stripping away their jobs. This feels like one of those moments for sure. I would say that for me, the biggest thing about it is the difference between creating something and producing content. So you said, art is content. That to me is an incredibly grim statement in some ways. And now I'm not saying that that isn't the reality. There are these huge commercial tectonic plates that are moving and are crushing entire industries, right? But art as content, I don't know. I think that maybe we need new tools to delineate between creating something and producing content. I think they're two different things. You can see a future where a TV show could last forever. It could sort of generate itself indefinitely. And for some people, I think that's really appealing. And you see it in board games, if we want to bring it back to this topic here, where you see, this kind of conveyor belt of producing more and more, not even iterations, but just content for this thing. And there's nothing wrong with that, if that's what people want. But I think that is very different from creating something new and different from things that came before. So I think that when talking about this stuff, there's almost two different sides to it. And I think that they can be readily separated, because I think that the AI generating something really quickly and really cheaply has a benefit to producing content, but not to producing or to creating art or even creation, I would say. I think that the struggles and the scrutiny and the deviations from your initial intentions that come with creation make that process valuable. And by stripping away all of that and by making it faster and cheaper, I don't think that benefits that. I think in the scrutiny and in the struggle, you create new, interesting things that stand up to further scrutiny from the next generation. The baton is passed that way. I think that would be that was rambling. I just rambled.
I want to jump in just really quickly. I don't want to like
Yeah.
dominate, but like you triggered something for me. I was just speaking with an artist, Daniel Solis. He works with WizKids and he has a lot of credits in the board game community. And he used this example, and I thought this was brilliant. So speaking to that difference, right, between art and content or creation and just producing. So if I were to ask a person to read a bunch of comic books and say, okay, I want you to produce something inspired by the bunch of comic books you read and produce like 10 different versions of it. Same thing, no adjustments, just produce 10 different versions of it. And so the artist will, follow the directions and produce something. And every single one of those 10 different things will have a subtle difference because as human beings, we bring ourselves into art all of the time. So like this time I was tired, this time I was inspired, this time there was a bird singing, this part, and like it could look like the same thing to the layman, but like, well, you look at it, especially with a trained eye, whatever, it's like obvious that there's little differences. Do that for an AI. They will give you this same exact thing 10 different times, 100 different times, 1,000 different times. There is no natural instinct to actually quote unquote create. And what we call creation, maybe this is more philosophical, I think actually what we're really talking is, okay, a human put their stamp on this. And even if the human didn't like put in something like radically new or whatever, it matters that a human put their stamp on it because it's a little bit different. It's a little bit more resonant with what's going on. It's a little more connected to our experience where a machine can't. They just can't. And I know there's going to be a lot of people that are like, machines can do all these wonderful things. The Charlie Hall interview with Travis Worthington stuck out to me because you pointed it out, Dan, of like AI can do all these wonderful things and proceeds to name none of them.
Yeah.
And and I'm begging you, tell me what a machine could do that a human can, and maybe you'll name some things. But then it's like, wait a minute, humans can also do wonderful things, and maybe we're kind of poo-pooing what those humans do, and not just like producing the wonderful things, but like just in the act of personalizing one of those, each of those 10 products. There's something a little bit unique, a little bit wonderful, just for being personhood there. So to kind of articulate the difference between like what content is just like the same thing over and over again. It doesn't matter. Art has that personal stamp, a little twist that makes a world of difference. Let me know, Pablo, if that analogy resonates with what we were talking about.
Sure. Yeah. Absolutely. I think, see those micro differences that you talked about. I would argue it goes way deeper than that. Entire projects can deviate in massive ways as a result of the resistance that comes from finding problems. It's Cole's here, and Kyle, who is an artist who I admire a lot. He made a series of videos where he talked about the process of making the board game Oath and the even just the initial iterations on what it was drawing from were interesting. And it was interesting because it changed in interesting ways. And then he said that halfway through the process, or a third of the way through the process, he hit this hard wall where he had been going down this one art style, and he realized it was dead end. It was going badly, right? And so he had to repivot and rethink about the whole project. And I think in that scrutiny, for me, is if I was art directing that, and that's my job in for a lot of projects, I think as a result it got better, and if you sluice away all that, you end up with something that doesn't go through those degrees of scrutiny, doesn't go through those variations as you spoke about. I'm tired, I'm angry, I'm affected by something I've read, I'm affected by something I've seen on television, I'm angry at the news, whatever. And so it doesn't have time to percolate. And instead, you end up with something, sorry, and I will stop in a second, but this idea of briefs, I thought that was really interesting. So that's my world, right? Like we will get briefs. And there are kind of 3 briefs that you can get. You can get as an artist, I think, and speaking to friends and family who work in this field, there are 3 kinds of briefs. There's a brief where somebody asks you to imitate someone. And they're kind of right that you can kind of imitate that, right? And this is the kind of hollow job that you have to do sometimes because it pays, right? And we all have to eat. And that can be rough because they're going, hey, you can sort of do that thing there, but that other person is too expensive, or they died a while ago, or whatever, right? That's fine. It's fine. I would say the results of that are usually pretty uninteresting, apart from anything else, because the artist is not that engaged. Try and make something a bit like that other thing. Then there's the good brief, which is that they've spent time researching this thing, and they come to you with a bunch of landmarks. But the terrain in between is yours. And hey, let's make something. Let's build something together. And then there's a bunch of human beings working together on something and bringing their individual skill sets together. And that's really exciting. And I think that produces the most interesting results. It's also the most costly, and it takes the most time. And then there is a final one that would make me not do the job. And that is when somebody gives me a brief and they go, can you do this? And they are wrong about what it is I can do. You know, when people equate the ability to draw with the ability to paint, or the ability to be a graphic designer with the ability to sketch, or whatever, the ability to draw a really good perspective with the ability to draw a really authentic looking face, right? And in that moment, you realize that the person who's in charge of the project is not the person, and they're making these aesthetic calls. They should not be making these aesthetic calls. And I think what I've seen with these AI projects, if we're talking about the board game industry, I've seen a lot of, I'm not even going to talk about the quality of AI art, because in some ways it's much better than me. It's certainly faster, right? And it can render a face in a classical style way better than I can, and instantaneously. However, the person who's making those aesthetic decisions is then pairing that art with a UI that they haven't also paid a UI designer for, or it's mismatched, and you get completely incongruous things that look bad and will age terribly, I think, as someone it's my professional opinion, and because they're not going through that scrutiny, right? And so in the brief, you're not stopping to pause and to attribute people who have the skill sets and the training, because art there's nothing magical about it. It is hours and hours and hours of practicing, and there is no gift involved, or it's for the people who are touched by a gift in art, it is microscopic compared to the people who just work really hard, and you're removing them from the process, and I think that causes a lot of problems. Sorry.
So Cole, I wanted to ask you, riffing on what Pablo is saying a little bit, that you're probably the one here who has the most experience both commissioning art and collaborating with artists. So maybe you have some insights into both sides of that process, both the commercial, in which, you know, you as a creator have at least been in proximity to the need to acquire art at a reasonable cost for your productions. But also, I know that you've spoken in the past about your collaborations, for example, with Kyle, with your brother. Could you walk us through some of your thoughts vis-a-vis that?
Well, I have so much to say, and I just want to thank Pablo and Jason for stating the kind of pillars of this conversation so well. I've commissioned a lot of art and have had to budget projects according to their art. So I'm pretty intimately familiar with how much an average board game is going to spend on the art per piece. Disappointingly, I mean, as if one could be not more disappointed at Stronghold, art is an expensive part of a project, but at a certain point, and oftentimes, to put this in real numbers, I'd say any game that is getting into the 20, 30,000 copy stratosphere can pretty well afford any art that they might need. And so when you start getting closer to the 100, 250,000, 500,000 that I'm sure Terraforming Mars has sold through, if not more, there doesn't appear to be much of an excuse for that from a budgetary standpoint. Now, I think Pablo spoke very well on the subject of briefs and of the difficulty of finding the right artist and the work that actually goes into finding an artist. It's no surprise that in other industries, people's whole jobs are finding and coordinating artists of appropriate style to the work that is being determined and to do the difficult work of art direction. I'm working on a design right now called Molly House, which is a very intriguing art brief because we need, Drew and I, for our historical games, use period pieces as much as possible. But the period work that exists around the 1720s queer culture in London is scant. There's just not a lot out there. So what we have to do is basically imagine it ourselves, which means finding an artist who is willing to do that kind of triangulation. We're able to show them a bit of Hogarth and some broadsheets and say, can you find the space in between these things? And can you depict these things based on descriptions from essentially a court record? And that can be an exciting brief for the right kind of artist, and it can be horrifying and mismatched to lots of other artists. And on the subject of that first group, this to me is the hallmark of the bad art director, because we have a joke at Leader Games about making sure that whenever we talk to Kyle, we're never talking to a pair of hands. Like Kyle is a mind. He is a brilliant thinker, visual and otherwise, when it comes to the way the worlds are constructed in our games. And so when we build our sort of setting Bibles and we think about the kinds of inspirations for a particular piece, we're always careful to give Kyle agency to sort of stretch out in that space. I don't know what he's going to draw, and there are different approaches. Some folks on staff like to provide Kyle with short paragraph descriptions. I usually give Kyle a title and the specific mechanical impact, and that's it. I don't like to give him more. And then if he feels lost or something, he can go from there. And this doesn't always work. It's not, I mean, none of these things always work. My favorite example is I have 2 cards in 2 different games that use the phrase emigre in opposite ways. And he drew a very fearsome looking emigre for a person who's supposed to be a refugee, and he drew a very passive emigre for someone who's supposed to be a fearsome general in exile. And so we had to correct, but that's the creative work and the collaborative work. I think, one place where I will, I guess I'll play the heel very slightly, is to start delineating between automation and advances in automation and the use of procedurally generated content, no matter whatever that procedure is. Because, for instance, if I have a game with 5 suits of cards and I use the same shape, and then I write a little script to change the color of those suits just to fill out all that card art, that is essentially procedurally generated art, and that's a useful tool. Or speaking more broadly, I'm quite enamored with the broader like roguelike and procedurally generated community. I've been playing those games for decades. They are very familiar with AI assisted tools, and they wouldn't even call them that precisely. I mean, there's a lot of term slippage here. That build books. Caves of Cud, probably my favorite design that's being worked on right now, has procedurally generated books. They could have hired writers, but the art direction is so carefully trained. There are people who are babysitting those algorithms. They are crafting every little letter that comes out to them. They're using the AI tools to operate at a scale that human hands couldn't operate on. The other example when I was at GDC last year, I saw the designers of Soulforge Fusion speak. Soulforge Fusion is a collectible card game that is a little bit like Keyforge taken to another level, with the idea that not only are the cards being procedurally generated, the art for the cards is being procedurally generated. So this is a game that every pack is going to have, it's drawing from a data bank of, I don't know, probably tens of thousands or 20, 40, 50,000 different cards that are being consistently generated. Now that kind of project doesn't make sense with human hands. I would hate to be an artist assigned to that project and say, well, now we need a blue-hatted pirate riding a dinosaur because that's what this card's like. I mean, that is the artist as a pair of hands, right? It's the worst prompt. And so I have a harder time critiquing those kinds of projects, because I do think that automation allows different kinds of work to be done. I don't think I've ever quite subscribed to the notion that, and I think this is probably where there's a little bit of daylight between Jason and I, but maybe less than it might otherwise seem, where I think that actually through automation, people often get more interesting jobs. But also I know that that's a painful, difficult process. At the same time, I tend to think about these tools as fundamentally problematic, both in terms of their core ethical framework, but also because they create problems. How do you possibly act as a good art director if your artist is a machine spitting out 1,000 illustrations every 5 minutes? It's a difficult logistical feat, even assuming you could be a good art director. And I think the degree to which you attempt to wrestle with that, you actually probably could do some remarkable things. What is troubling to me is the degree to which people don't want to wrestle with it. And they just fundamentally misunderstand how art works in anything. I mean, it's a little bit like handing a child a gun or something. There's just a total disconnect from the tool that they've been plugged into and the job that is before them. And that's the thing that when I read the interview with the Terraforming Mars crew, that was so galling, that it felt like there was a real lack of curiosity and a lack of, I don't know, I almost want to say respect for the tremendously powerful tools that they now had access to.
So speaking about handing a child a gun, one of the talking points that I often hear around generative AI, and I'm so grateful, Cole, that you are picking that apart, because I think we make a lot of mistakes when talking about AI art, because we're talking about an enormous range of technologies. But one of the refrains that I hear quite often is that this democratizes art. And I know that, Liz, you've had some opinions about that, and I would love to hear your perspective, because when I go into an AI generator and I type, Velociraptor with Ronald Reagan's face, I get exactly what I'm looking for. Haven't I democratized art that I have stolen from Pablo his talents, and now I'm an artist as well? What are your thoughts there, Liz?
Oh, I was the you involved here. I see. So I did release some comments about this, and I'd be really interested in other people kind of adding to the conversation as well. But I think that when we talk about democratization does not mean that I should be able to steal Pablo's talent and just be like, yes, make me a raptor with Jesus writing it, but in the style of Pablo Clark. Like, that's not, first of all, I would actually not really consider that art. I would consider that like a throw, again, there's no iteration there, as we discussed, right? But I also think that real democratization of art would be giving everybody the space to learn how to make art. I mean, if art is a process and it is an internal journey as well as content, then real democratization of art, just like democratization of education, right, is giving people time and giving people opportunity to develop into the artist that they are. If you type something into a computer and it spits out art, that's still not really the artist that you are, because that's not the art that you would make. And I sort of compare this to things like ChatGPT, where a lot of my students kind of want to use it as a shortcut for writing. So to me, these are very closely related things, and I think we should be panicking in equal measure about them. But when you ask for, like, write me an essay about ancient Rome or something like that, right? The spit back that you're getting from something like ChatGPT, even if it's very convincing writing, I don't want to talk about the error aspect of it, because I actually think that it'll continue to correct. But what you're not getting, right, is your own actual interpretation of the material. You're not getting the time that you spent to think through the subject. You're not spending time to understand and then really craft a response that reflects what you think and what you mean. One of the things that actually I complain about as a teacher is that we try to teach our students to write, but we don't succeed enough, in my opinion, in teaching them that writing is supposed to mean something. You write because you're trying to say something. And to write well is to successfully communicate exactly what it is that you were trying to say. So we ask people to write arguments, right? Or we ask people to write stories. But the real point of writing is to have an idea, figure out how to express it, and then craft the words around your thoughts and your ideas that come out. And I am not an artist, but it seems to me that art is very much the same. And that's why artists go through sketches and they go through prototypes and they change the direction and they want to mix colors in different ways, right? I mean, to have an artistic idea is only the very first step. Like the process is thinking about what is it that I want to say, and did I create something that says what I meant? And then I, as of course, as a person on the other side, want to be able to look at something that someone else made and think, ah, yes, this is like if Cole sent me an essay that he wrote and I was trying to really engage with it, like engage with his thoughts and, you know, his opinions about a subject. And he's like, oh yeah, ChatGPT wrote that. I'd feel so cheap because I'd be sitting here really trying to like take his thoughts seriously and really interpret him like brain to brain, person to person, and then not even know which of those thoughts were actually his and then which he just borrowed and was like, yeah, that's good enough from a computer. And so when we talk about democratization, like, what are you democratizing exactly? Like the ability to have an idea, everybody can do that. But I feel like, you know, claiming that easy art is somehow democratization really cheats you of, I think, what you actually have rights to as a person in a democratic society, which is the right to actually form and express a real opinion, as opposed to offloading all of that onto something else and then having kind of an empty perspective, at least in my opinion, that lacks the richness of your personality and yourself coming out through it because you just wanted a quick result. And I mean, if that's democratization, no wonder people complain about it. Like,
there's a I don't know. I'm just gonna I'll go right into it. But there is a funny line here because I have run into students. I was on campus giving a chat a few weeks ago, and I ran into students. We were talking about ChatGPT just casually, and they talked about like conversing with it to try to get it to say what they wanted to say. There was a dialogue. They were using it like a tool to create a kind of message. And this made me profoundly uncomfortable because it started reminding me of ethical debates around remix culture and around using tools in, you know, if they're making a beat that like, well, they wouldn't be able to do that if they just had a pair of drums, but they have found a way through a digital interface to start to, you know, produce content at a different register. And I mean, so that to me is the most uncomfortable part of this debate, which I'm just unsettled by, is the notion of the AI artist who in dialogue with an algorithm is building a kind of skill. And I can't tell if my desire to not recognize that skill is coming from a desire to protect an ethical position that I think is valuable, or is actually coming from an ethically well-reasoned value. You know, I used to teach a class on the nature of art, and I would every once in a while the students would try to corner me and they'd say, all right, Cole, what do you think art is? What's art? I said, art is a word you use to defend the things that you think are valuable. That's it. I mean, I think that's like, it's almost at the heart of it. Like, you know, look, I love the Beatles. I don't like the Beastie Boys. That's not art. And it's a way of categorizing certain types of expression. Now, I love the Beastie Boys. Since I'm on the record here. But I do think that, you know, even as I'm in complete agreement with you, Liz, about this, I'm also like queasy about going down a path that is only recognizing certain kinds of labor, the labor that just happens to exist now.
So I can hear that. I will say there's actually something else about that makes me queasy. And it kind of, I think, lies at the heart of some of our conversations we've all been having online about whether to take board games seriously as history, is it just for fun, et cetera, et cetera. When you are dialoguing with AI, let's say for theoretical sake, right, that it's possible. Who is it that you're dialoguing with, and whose ideas are you getting back? That's the part that I find the most disturbing, because we've also noticed, right, that in terms of the training data that AI gets, it spits different things back out. So, for example, a tendency to whitewash some of the art that has come back from early generative AI. Or, you know, this like talk with someone from history, like those little chat bots that you can like talk with a historical figure, trying to get a Nazi to admit that they're anti-Semitic is like impossible in terms of how some of these little chatbots are built. And so the other thing that we're forgetting, right, is that computer programs work. I mean, AI is pushing this, right? but you have to feed them in order for them to be able to spit something out. And they do still work according to directives that originate with the person. So it's also an issue of what are we distancing ourselves from that's at the heart of how the AI is working and what has been used to feed it. And then how does that impact what ideas it's able to give back? And then also how much of yourself did you give it by attempting to dialogue with it? And then what will happen to the pieces of yourself that you gave?
I want to reflect on some of the stuff. Like, I mean, hearing Cole and Liz talk, so many of the words that we use, like feeding an AI, the AI is learning. We're dialoguing with an AI. These are human words. And so there's this strong tendency to regard what we're doing in terms of the interface with this artificial intelligence, right? I mean, all these words that we use that want to kind of almost anthropomorphize what we're doing. And I think by using the words that we're using, we might be kind of lifting up processes, or what I think is more, I think, the philosophical end, it's reducing down what humans do to whatever the humans do. Humans are, the AI is training on all this data and, spitting something out. While humans look at stuff and they're training on the data and then spitting something out. Meanwhile, like, well, how does an AI do it? AI reads every play that's ever been published. And they kind of guess at what would work, where a human's doesn't think that way. Humans read a few plays and they extrapolate off of the organized kind of life experience, which is from everything. Like an AI, unless you specifically tell it to go, okay, be inspired by everything that you've ever read, even if it's not a play. The human is going to be like, okay, I'm inspired by, cooking eggs in the kitchen and I made a play out of this. So I'm inspired by this, like, totally random things that have nothing to do with plays. And so, like, I mean, it may sound, there is a huge difference between those two things. And by using these words, I'm dialoguing with it. It is an intelligence. I think that we are very much obfuscating what we're dealing with and lifting up and dumbing down things, bringing them on the same plane, and it's creating a lot of difficulty. Like, and speaking to Cole's point about, okay, we've been dealing with this for a while. I think of like online dating. It's like, okay, I'm online dating with this person who I've never met them in real life, but we're dating, and they say they're dating. To Cole's point, it's almost like why people say, Art, I'm, this is a deep relationship, and so I'm going to call it dating. Meanwhile, it's of a fundamentally different character than someone who's dating in real life and they've made physical contact, but we use the same word because we want to, like, say something, right? And so I think the being attentive to the words we're using, why we're using them, and what kind of slippages those words introduce is a big part of this conversation.
I appreciate that, Jason, especially because I'm one of those people who in ethics, we do a lot of hypothetical discussions, right? Where we will begin a conversation about something like AI and say, well, what if this is a person, right? What if this thing actually does have a semantic understanding of the semiotic inputs that we're feeding into it? Well, that would be concerning, wouldn't it? Because we have created an entity that exists solely in a master-slave relationship to put things out when we ask it to. It doesn't do anything on its own. So I especially appreciate that. We may have seen just a few days ago, NPR did an article where asking AI if they could do Black doctors treating impoverished white children, and the AI was able to produce many images of white doctors treating Black children, which is an interesting exhibition of human bias behind what the machine is capable of producing. What are you thinking about that, Jason, about the potential personhood, not only that it's reducing in us, but when we talk about AI, when we're anthropomorphizing it, what other effects do you think that has on the conversation?
I mean, I just think that we shouldn't do it. I mean, the natural human tendency is to want to anthropomorphize everything, right? I mean, a game is my baby, my bicycle is my baby, and that's how we make the world kind of understandable that way. We've been doing that for millennia, and now we're doing it with this thing. And I just feel like I almost kind of don't want to go down the road of that question, because I just don't think. I think that by continuing to do that, we are continuing to kind of like turn the conversation into something that it really isn't, which is like just bottom line, we are not there. In AI, whatever we call AI, is not doing what humans do. AI is not looking at a bunch of text or images or whatever and processing them the same way as a human is. And so the reason I want to just put that, like really focus on that, is because that gets to the ethical stuff, which you haven't really talked about yet. The idea that AI steals, right? And that, you know, there's a like an artist end. I'm going to answer the question I want as opposed to answer the question you asked. Apologize for that. On the artist end, there is a fundamental thing, and you can kind of speak to this, Pablo. If another person creates off of my art, I'm okay. Like, I inspired that person. And if it's directly imitative, that's a problem. But like, you know, there's something, there's a grace there, where if an AI, you know, takes in and produces something off of my art, I feel a lot queasier because, yeah, you know, go ahead, Pablo.
Well, sorry, but yeah, you're exactly right. Like it's an out, isn't it? This, how can we hold this big amorphous thing up to some ethical standard, right? And it's a pretty big question to ask yourself if you're a board game, trying to make your first board game, and you're pumping a bunch of prompts into this AI, and you're making a science fiction game. And this AI imagines science fiction as everybody is in the future is, I don't know, white, thin, 80s, like sunglasses, whatever it's approximated, right? Are you going to be asking yourself those big ethical questions when you're also trying to cut costs everywhere? You know, it's like you can't hold it up to the same scrutiny because it's a tool, and yet it's a tool whose results are aggregating humans, aggregating a read on this thing. There was an example. I'm not going to obviously not use particulars, but there was someone in this industry who is interested in this generative art, and just experimenting with it very casually. They didn't wrap it into a commercial product. But they posted this picture of this woman in the future, and they listed the prompts that they use, and they were enamored with the kind of like mechanical result of the thing. It was really detailed, right? There was loads. Her skin was incredibly smooth, and for the most part, it looked really well rendered, right? But there was no scrutiny to like, oh right, that's the future, right? And I made not a single decision in that. It just spat out a result, and they're like enormous ethical questions, I think, and like problems, because we're at this really hard intersection, just as the conversation when it first started about the commercial application of this and how it's going to affect all these industries. And that hard intersection between that and these big ethical questions results in a lot of people, I would say, ignoring the ethical questions and just keep driving towards the commercial profit. Essen was a really interesting example where, they had that artwork, and I'm sure we've all seen it, right? We're all in that industry, obviously. We saw those examples, and they were like, I wasn't really quite sure about where that was being displayed. Was it on a ticket? Was it an incidental bit of art or something like that? And then I saw some footage of people entering the main halls, and there it was, right? It's really large. And I thought, the greatest indictment for that is that a lot of people say, oh, the AI can't get the hands right? And I think that's so reductive, because AI will outstrip my ability to draw in a matter of months, if I'm years if I'm lucky, months otherwise, right? Although I don't think he'd beat me in other ways. But what I thought was such an indictment there was that you had these totally vacuous, like grinning people, writ large of this thing. But it's the board game. The board game that they're playing, it was soup. It was just an amalgam of a million different board games, and it meant nothing. And that to me was like that. There's that intersection of just hard, like, I don't know, I guess like commercial priorities overriding everything else. And it felt like nobody questioned that at all, that we are at the, you know, the one of the biggest, if not the biggest board game convention in the world, and we're presenting board games as just this amalgam of nonsense. And you look at those photographs and be like, oh, you know, that one girl had, you know, 6 fingers. I don't care, not really, not in the context of that. What I care about is that those board games look like nonsense, absolute nonsense. People holding pencils, people like it reduced it to nothing. Ash, terrible. All right.
Here are signifiers of fun. Here are some random things that we call fun. And so someone put in like, give me fun board game things. And it's like, oh, and yeah, that's what emerges when you reduce art to content, is a mishmash of things that are fun.
And
Hey, Dan.
oh, sorry.
I was gonna say, I kind of like to bring in what Ian O'Toole had to say soon.
Yeah, and I was actually just about to ask you to do that. So Liz went to the trouble of reaching out to a couple of our artist friends, Pablo among them, but she also chatted with Ian O'Toole, and I think he had an absolutely wonderful example to share. And so please do, Liz.
Here, host disabled participant screen sharing. Who's the host?
Not me.
It's Harold. Harold, give me permission. Let's see if he's here.
Or make her.
Hey,
a
Liz, that
co-host
should
if
be.
they can.
Yay! It looks like we're doing it.
There you go.
Y'all can see all my random tabs. Sorry about that. Okay, so here we go. I just took, Ian O'Toole sent me this huge wall of text. It was awesome. But I took some bits of it, and I think you'll see a lot of resonance with things that we've been saying all night. So he mentions that we've been using some form of AI, completely the wrong term, but that horse has bolted for many years. So that's where he talks about things like just tools that make an artist's job easier. But he says what does raise his hackles is the process that companies and that the AI itself currently goes through to create images. It is stealing and it is anti-artist. It undermines artists' control over the usage of their work, which is one of the most important tools any artist has to make a living. There is currently no ethical way to use generative AI. So for Ian, this is like the root point. Like you could talk about a lot of other things, but for as long as this art is not ethical, you know, it's just it's a no-go for him, and I actually agree. He also mentions the wrong argument. So Pablo, you actually spoke to this independently. So the quality of image produced by generative AI, so like the weird hands, like this is not the right angle to be looking at this from. It's going to get better. There's going to come a time when it's impossible to distinguish without really looking and knowing what you're looking for. But for him, this is largely irrelevant because the point is that we don't want to set a precedent that reduces artists' control over the usage of their work. So that's like that baseline generative art is theft issue. But I also thought this was just so cool, like how AI learns versus how artists learn. So it's just the same as artists getting inspiration from other artists. Anyone who says this has zero understanding of how artists actually work. And I think talking to you, Pablo, tonight has really been a great illustration of that. There's no such thing as one-to-one copying in art. According to Ian, it just doesn't happen. An artist is going to end up with a style and a technique that's a product of influence, experimentation, accident, cultural context, and thousands upon thousands of tiny decisions, which is something that I think that Pablo is really interested in. Cole, you're really interested in the idea of decisions and interpreting them. That's my particular obsession, like as a reviewer and a games critic, and also somebody who's like designing a game. Like I feel like my decisions have really been key to like what night witches will be. And as we work with an artist, like that's going to continue to be true. But this is a process of creating artistic voice, and it never ends. In fact, I think it's far more accurate to say the process is the art. And I think that that is what you're missing if you're not having a process. Like I just found this really meaningful, actually. And then he mentions generative AI does not do this. It does nothing like it. It's the difference between eating a meal from a master chef and then trying to create it and stealing parts of that meal and then rearranging those parts on a different plate and calling it your cooking. And I think, yeah, at the heart of this, right, is what is it to have an artistic voice what is it to create something that's yours and put it out there? And I think that it actually does kind of go down to that mishmash of board games that we saw on the Essen like art, right? It's that it takes a person to really understand why a board game is fun, what a board game should look like, how people should look, and like not manic, like they're, I don't know, look like a horror movie. Like those people were so manically happy. Like, what does an actual naturally happy person look like? Like maybe AI can get closer to that, but there's nothing like another person to fully understand where you're coming from. It's a person to person thing, in my opinion. So that's where Ian O'Toole is at on it. And I just kind of felt like it was a good idea to make sure that we heard from him as well, because he tweeted that this discussion exhausted him and that he didn't want to argue. So I really wanted to give him a space too to say something, even if he doesn't want to be here and like crank with us about it.
Thank you so much, Liz. So I have a question for us. I think we can agree that that we're talking about kind of two things here. And this is something that I actually really want Cole to weigh in on, because I know Cole and I had a conversation where he said that one of these two things, he thinks it's a bit of a rhetorical trap. And I want to speak to that because I think it is maybe a little bit too. So Ian, for instance, points out, and I think totally rightly, that right now there is no ethical way to do this generative AI artwork. And I agree. I completely agree. But so let's put on our counterfactual philosopher hat and let's say, what if we could create AI that was ethical? Because I think we're getting into a very different discussion, that we have the ethical discussion, and let's bracket that. That's very important. And I agree with all the points we've made today. But if we could have a system where AI is ethical, and where it's not imploding, right? Because we're seeing already that the grayscale problem is happening, where AI now is scraping AI and it's basically turning into a formless static because it's Xeroxes of Xeroxes all the way down. But so what happens if we can get rid of the ethical problem? Is this still an issue?
Sorry,
go ahead, Pablo.
And just to say that there are practical steps being made towards that. So it's not purely a rhetorical, hypothetical question. There are absolutely steps being made towards that. That's all I was going to say. That it doesn't. I don't think it needs the qualification that it's completely a kind of abstract question. I think that there are absolutely practical measures. In fact, there was an example, because there's a bunch of class action lawsuits happening against AI companies right now. So Carla Ortiz is an artist who's she worked for like Marvel. She's a very like prominent artist, and so she's sort of spearheading this thing now. Like, I don't agree with all of her decisions, and even how she thinks about AI. I'm not totally in line with her, but she has a product called Glaze, essentially would allow you to present your art nominally for a human completely the same, but for an AI it would be completely destructive, static. And so although a human being would perceive it as the drawing that it is, a computer program would see it as nonsense, right? And so she has this technology, and that's running. And also in certain builds of certain AIs, they've removed certain artists because the threat of legal action was hanging over some of these things. Although I don't think they will win, by the way. I don't think the curve works that way. I think the curve goes in the other way. I think there's a much larger financial incentive versus giant companies versus non-unionized artists. But I will say that there are examples of exactly what you're saying there happening, where it's like, well, you I don't want my art involved in that, then it can go. And so there's a practical application in that as well.
Yeah, and thank you for weighing in on that, Pablo, because that's exactly the sort of thing I'm talking about now. And I don't want to dismiss, I understand that there are concerns with that too, right? That I know that some artists who have been approached and asked, can we pay you specifically to train our AI on? And that still raises for me a few ethical questions about being an artist kind of put into a tough corner. Like you look at the Luddite movement, and there were stocking makers who were being paid to help build the machines that would take away work from themselves and their peers. So I think that there are concerns there, and I don't want to remove that, and I don't want to downplay that in any way. But I do appreciate that clarification, especially though I want to ask Cole, because you've indicated to me that you think that we're looking at a little bit of a rhetorical trap, and maybe it would be helpful for you to pick that apart for us. What do you mean by that sort of thing?
So part of the problem comes from the way the word theft gets used. I think this is the root of the problem, and then I'll move to the more ethical considerations, because I come from, I think maybe other folks here have too. I come from like a labor organizing background. And when I think about theft, I think about wage theft. I think about theft of labor, theft of bodies. Viewing something and copying it is not theft. Copying, if someone gives me a USB filled with songs and I copy it on my computer, that's not theft. Like, information doesn't quite work that way. But at the same time, something is happening when a machine trains itself on these things. There's a kind of derivative, a derivation that's happening. I always think about AI as fundamentally just motion blur for images, where because the bank of images is so wide, so varied, you can kind of motion blur in between those things. But it's fundamentally soupy. It's fundamentally derivative. And I think from that perspective, I start to put it in the same category as pieces of art that are derivative of artists that I've worked with. There's a board game, I think it's out now, which uses a style that is heavily derivative of Kyle's. And they were getting picked on, and I'm cheating a little bit by telling a story, one of Kyle's stories for him, but I'll say it because he's not here. They were getting picked on for using this art that was completely derivative of his style. And they wrote him a message asking him to come out and say it was okay, and say that they hadn't stolen any art from him. And Kyle, rightly, I think, said, "Well, no, of course not. I can't tell you what you're doing is wrong, but I'm not happy about it. I'm not gonna pretend otherwise." I felt for him. I mean, this is a kind of fundamental problem. I think, these, as Pablo said, an ethically sourced image interpolation, an ethically sourced AI drawing, it will come, but that, and so I think building an argument on that ethical framework, I think, is a little dead end. It might work this year, it will stop working next year. And so it's better, I think, to use a different tool from labor, which is to say, we should ask. I mean, so I'll back up a step, actually, because I'm not dodging your question. I'm going to answer it, Dan, but I want to back up half a second. So the giant Essen banner with the suit board game. I will say that the image is, of course, ridiculous. And Pablo, I thought you spoke very well about it. At the same time, as someone who's run big events, one could imagine how that happened. You hire some third party, they're a little late, they give you a bunch of images, we got to print it on these big banners, nothing's the right size, we're running out of time. You look at it on your phone while you're on the bus, you say, this looks great, get it printed, we need to get to the next thing.
Or it's too exact, right?
Yeah,
right? Like if an artist had done it, they could have just drawn root or wingspan, right? And then you'd be in danger of being too reductive.
Well, the role in that situation is you do not want to be the star of Reddit. You want to do something that people look up and say, huh, this must be Essen, and then walk in and never take a picture of it. You're trying not to be noticed. And so, like, I had as a fellow organizer who's had to run things, a little bit of my heart did go out to the Essen staff and thought, oh boy, you hired a real stinker firm and you made some wrong calls, and now you're really, getting it. And so, in such a situation, I asked myself, what protection could have possibly existed to have stopped this from happening? And this moves me into, like, as I'm thinking about policy and how I want people to behave. So obviously I'm upset by by the use of AI art. I'm tremendously upset by it. I think it is anti-human in the highest registers that it could possibly be. And that's both at the level of the quality of the work, which I do think is fundamentally a derivative, but the more galling problem is that it's anti-human in how it treats the creative process. And just speaking as a publisher, what is my recourse? Like, what behavior can I try to model, or what thing do I want to suggest people do? And the only tool that I have that I'm comfortable with is the tool of disclosure, the tool of saying, look, here is a thing that we're making, and here's how we made it. And you can judge for yourself whether or not you think that is ethical or not. So if someone wants to get mad because our brilliant artist, Rachel Ford, knocked off a little bit of Hogarth's style and included some winks to some of his famous engravings, they can get mad about that and say that we should have done something even more radical. That's fine. But at least we're showing our work. And in the same way, you can imagine if someone wants to run, if the guys running SoulForge Fusion want to run a weird AI procedurally generating board game that's going to build more cards than there are grains of sand in the universe, that's fine. But people should know what they're engaging with. And they can make that kind of calculation for themselves. And I think if people understand that, I'm inclined to think that the better process, the better collaboration, the more sustainable mode of work, that's going to win out. But when you start to hide those things, then it's hard to know what might happen.
That's exactly right. So I completely agree with that, and I think there's like an inverse to some of the things I've been saying about like how impassioned I get about human endeavor. And if your climbing instructor had been climbing for 8 minutes, would you trust them? Would you want them holding the belay, right? Like come on. But I will say, like, there is value in creating something like we all bore witness to NFTs, and like I come from an extremely, I work in video games a lot, and you should see the fervor and the hunger with which NFTs were adopted in that space in that very short period of time. And it felt like the birth of a star. It just felt like it had such a radical impact on thousands, if not tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people's lives, as these companies redirected and course directed into all these different projects, and they ultimately ended up as cul-de-sacs, commercial cul-de-sacs. So I do think there is a financial incentive in this as well. I think it bears out. Cool. I think you are a brilliant games designer, but part of the reason why you are here is because of Root. And a huge part of Root is that it looks the way it does, right? Root is available in Target, right? Because in part, it looks the way it does. And that is a huge part of it, you could approximate Kyle's style, but it has huge value. The profundity of his style has huge value. It has huge commercial value, and I think that these companies that are racing to be faster and more reductive in what they're doing, and if we eliminate this person and we eliminate this process, we save this amount of time and this amount of money. I think that is a pretty short-sighted way of looking at things.
I think I want to totally jump off that for a second. Speaking of Kyle, and I look at a game of Root and I see Kyle. I look at a game of a Fowers game and I see Ryan Goldberry. I look at Vince Dutray. I look at these people and I get their names. They have credit on these games. So to go back to the original question, Dan, and Cole answered the question about theft. So, or like ethical AI. I just think that that is such a multi-level thing that there's a lot of spurs that have to be removed from that side in order to, be qualified as ethical. And I don't think that it can even happen. So the initial thing is, okay, the training of it. Like, I mean, can we get an AI that is only quote unquote trained on public domain stuff or Creative Commons stuff? Well, now, no, definitely no, because even if you now feed something to it and it's your own work or it's consented, like in order to get to where it is, its general knowledge was trained on XYZ ABC, and you have no idea what it is. So can we? So your question, I'm assuming, presupposes we can get to a point where, well, let's rebuild an AI from scratch and use only public domain stuff. And like, can we get there? Maybe, maybe not. So we can get there. Here's the deeper ethical issue for me, though, and this also relates to the labor question. So if I build an AI and it's trained on public stuff and the artist's been compensated, but whatever's happening, right? And it starts to produce art. That art can be in someone's style, but it doesn't belong to anybody. No one can take credit for it. That is Midjourney's art. That is Dolly's art. That is not a person's art. And that is so important, because how do artists turn their art into labor, into sustenance? It is the credit. When Cole looks at, when someone submits art to Cole for a board game, what are they submitting? They're submitting their portfolio, the works that they can say, this is my work, I have credit for it, and therefore please, hire me, and then I can create my stuff. And that's great in terms of like private portfolio, but like what's more impressive is when there's other works that have been paid, that have been commissioned, that have been like, you see that even like terrible, like you mentioned before, the terrible art that was done in 5 minutes, and it's on like some banner somewhere. I can still say that's credit. And I could still, put that on a resume, put that on a portfolio, and be like, okay, I did this, and I can try to turn that into labor. When we have this proliferation of creditless art, it's dumb art, it's soupy art, it's bad art, it's creditless art. And if we're going to be in a situation where we allow that to proliferate, then that's where the true creative labor can really go down, because we are looking at a future where fewer and fewer artists are going to have credit for the art they produce. And maybe, speaking of the labor saving, maybe we kind of come out the other side and more artists get better at it, and there's more jobs, and imagine a scenario of abundance and everything. These companies are not interested in abundance. They're interested in, getting it done cheap. And I think that the ideal for a lot of these companies is art that they own, and there is no credit. They don't have to give anything to anybody. And so if you're talking about theft and the ethics of it, I go there.
So thank you so much, Jason. Sorry, Liz, did you have something? Go ahead.
Yeah, I was actually, the thing that Pablo said that really got me going was talking about the sort of the reductiveness of all of this as well, that without human originality or new input, because if nobody's making anything new, then that training data is going to get real samey real quick. It makes me think too, back right at the beginning of our conversation where we talked about content versus art, content versus creation. And I do think that we have a really important choice collectively to make here. So Cole, I think, has some faith that the market will choose a creation over some content. And I hope that that's true, partially because, honestly, I'm not interested in content. I actually hate my own work being referred to as content. But the reason I hate it, right, is because it makes it sound like it's just a product, that there was not any real agency behind it, that there was not any real thought into it. It's just there to fill space. And like, I really just don't feel comfortable jumping excitedly into a world where everything's just there to fill space. That sounds horrible to me, especially about things that are supposed to enrich life, like art.
I just to follow on from that, and I'm looking at some of the comments in the chat. So just one thing to be totally clear, like, at least in my experience and my peers, this idea that I'm trying to like there's this thing about enshrining art. I don't think art should be enshrined like that. I think so much of what we're talking about is a skill-based process. And so there were some things about the amount of time that things take to make, and maybe it's good if we expedite that and all that sort of thing. Like a jobbing artist has to work incredibly quickly and incredibly adaptively. And that's a huge part of it. You will not get hired if you don't work quickly and you don't work adaptively. So no, I'm not saying that we spend a prohibitive amount of time on these things, or that we enshrine the artistic process to the point where it becomes inaccessible to a lot of people. My argument's the exact opposite. I would say that what we should enshrine is the idea of making things together, and that in sharing in the collaborative process with thinking human beings, which sounds a bit snide, but it's like there's a lot of value in just looking at someone, and seeing the fear in their eyes or seeing the joy in their eyes, and like when things, that intersection between commercial interests and ethical interests sometimes lose that it's us, it's humans, and there is great joy and fear and all these things wrapped up in these processes, and that if we pave over that, we lose a lot. But also, like don't get me wrong, speed is super important and commercial pressures are super important. And if design is something that you're doing on the side of your day job, just to be clear, my day job is not drawing images I love to make, right? It is making images for other people. And the reason why I've gotten good at drawing is because I've drawn thousands of times again and again and again. And I've gotten quicker and smarter at it. And it's the same way that a writer has, or a technician, or an engineer, or any number of other things. So like speed is important. It is important because there's like very practical concerns. But I would say that, does this industry need us to create games faster and more games? I would say that there are 20 books that I love, and there are 20 games that I love, and there are 20 films that I love. And if you put a gun to my head, there's probably 10, right? And I'm not sure that we need to be making things quicker, right? Automation is amazing, and the ability to make more things is interesting. Yes, it provides scope. But does this industry need to pump out more games? Or do we just make good games, And they're not mutually exclusive. I'm not saying that this technology means that one results in the other, but that drive to just create exclusively more and more is not, I'm not sure that that's what we should be aiming.
And see, speaking to the technology point of like speed, like, I mean, you think about the history, to go back to labor, right? Speed is the thing that is technology accomplishes many more times. Like, steam, the jackhammers can make railroad track faster than humans can pound it, and a printing press can produce stuff, and faster than a human scribe can do it. So it's like, okay, we're constantly evolving technology to make things faster, more productive, etc. The difference here, and I think this is a fundamental difference, and I'm willing to kind of argue this. I'm not like sold on this, but I think this is gets at what you're talking about, Pablo. There's something different about this speed. So most of technological advances have replaced labor that is dreary, dirty, and dangerous. We don't want people in mines. We don't want people laying track. Like if robots could do that, then fine. We just got to take care of what's the next, so that, like, the Luddites were misunderstood. They people thought they were against the machines. No, they were not against the machines. They're against, like, just being dumped out and not being taken care of and transition to the next thing. They wanted the transition. They didn't want to just like destroy the machines. So like, okay, people just want to be able to pursue their labor. So it's like, okay, had we done that, that would have been fine. Okay, technology, proceed, speed, get rid of the dreariness, get rid of the dullness. This may be the first time in human history that a technological innovation is going after creativity and the stuff that makes us human. To speak to Pablo's point and points that all of us have made on this panel, this technology in the hands of folks who don't mean that great. And I am thinking of Travis, and I know there's people who are proponents of AI. They love AI. That's great. I'm not talking about y'all. I'm talking about the people who don't want to just supplement human creativity, but replace it because it's easier and faster and cheaper. And what are they replacing? We're not replacing dull, dreary work. Maybe we are, who wants to draw 10,000 trees. Okay, and that's fine. But still, like even the person drawing 10,000 trees is a little bit of creativity there, and we're coming for that. And that's, I think, where we really need to, in terms of the conversation of how do we assess this? Is this theft? Is this ethical? Or is the speed worth it? And, how do we evaluate the speed? Well, how the speed is now coming for the stuff that we regard as human. And I don't know if we're ready for that.
No, the troublesome like footnote or point here is always like the beginnings of recorded music, right? There used to be a lot more musicians than there are now. And at the same time, there was a democratization there too, right? Suddenly you didn't need to have access to, or different kinds of access provided different kinds of access, right? The thing that I keep like stewing on as I go through this is I think about this fundamentally as kind of from two angles, and what I'm talking about is the decision not to use AI art. I think that I've kind of like fundamentally two reasons why I don't use it. One, I adore the creative process. I think it's brilliant. There was an interesting viral thread in video game design circles where people were asking, what does success look like when you work in the video game industry? And someone wrote that success is the ability to finish a game and work on another one with any of the team that want to stay around for the next game. And I thought, yes, that's exactly it. And Patrick and I, the owner of Leader Games, he and I always remind ourselves that if in 10 years we close up shop and don't have $1 to our names, what a wonderful way to have spent 10 years. Like that's it. That's the main thing. And artists are part of that. They're as important as everything else. Kyle and I say that it's his job to get people to play the game the first time and my job to get them to play it the second time. We're very clear about what the art is doing. And really, I know that they're playing it more times because of Kyle's art. So that's like the ethical part. But there's another part of me that thinks about the quality of the work being generated. And here, I think that Pablo and Ian are quite right that like fixating on numbers of fingers, that's not what we're talking about. We talk about quality. We talk about quality as the fundamental novelty that any work of art brings, right? This is something new. The artist is combining with the project in a way that is novel, is interesting. And if I had to make a bet, I would say that the work created by humans is going to be better. It's going to resonate more deeply than a derivative work designed by, a process. And I'm sure there are places where that's not going to be true, and people for whom that isn't going to be true. But when it comes to me and my house, like that's what we're going to do. We're going to put our bet on work that is made by humans, thinking that it's going to resonate with other humans. And briefly to knock on Travis just one more time, I'm in the process of
punching bag. That's it.
Yes, sorry, he's not on the call. It's so easy. I'm in the process of rereading Robinson's Mars trilogy, which are such books of terrible beauty. Like they're books about the terraforming of Mars, and they are startling and strange. And I cannot tell you how boring the art of terraforming Mars is in the context of beautiful work on the exact same subject. And I just kept thinking like, my goodness, this is the dullest looking thing imaginable. The fact that any of these cards look like they could be like a Netrunner card or something, you know what I mean? Like there's a kind of like non-specificity about them that is just so disappointing because it's such a great subject. And like one of the tragedies of the Terraforming Mars project, and this is where I get like really animated, and so I'll try to hold back a little bit, is here you have a game that has sold, let's say, 500,000 copies, and that's a conservative estimate. You could, I know, it's like probably well over 1 million. Anyway, it doesn't matter. They could be undertaking one of the like most beautiful, largest, ambitious artistic projects in the board game space. They could be building something that would really last, that would really be amazing. And instead, it's content, it's dreck, it's just a pipe of content. They're just shoving it down. And it's so disappointing because you don't get that many opportunities to make that kind of thing. Imagine if Wingspan had its success with AI art. A person like Beth Sobel would have never had a chance to illustrate something so remarkable and so amazing, right? And so it's, when I think of, I mean, and this is something that I think about when it comes to something like Root, where I think like the way we treat Root at Leader Games is basically, this game is done very well. It's no longer just our game. We are custodians. It's a sacred trust. And we have to think about the resources that have been invested in us and spend them in the best way possible to produce things that merit the trust that's been invested in us. And I look at Terraforming Mars and I think, my goodness, look at all of this trust wasted, just wasted.
I'm showing Puerto Rico right now. Puerto Rico, 1897. This is the remake of Puerto Rico, and the original one, not exactly known for its stellar art, right? It didn't leap out for that. It's all gameplay and everything. When I was asked to be the cultural consultant for this game, the one thing I wanted was portraiture, and I wanted a Puerto Rican artist to do it. And so we get on the call, and I'm describing, I love this guy. He's like Puerto Rican Geralt right here. I love him. And I'm describing what I want. And all the artists, and eventually like the artist just kind of slows down and says, wait a minute, you want me to draw my family? Yes. My family, I have, like white, light-skinned people with freckles. I have dark-skinned people, I have morenos, I have all these other people. And so like all that process and all that mishigash, and all I had to do was tell the guy, I want you to draw the family. And I gave him direction. And this project to me is made because of the artistic choices and the human being that was able to bring their stuff into their art. And I hope that resonates, and I hope that when they actually fixed all the production issues, and there's a whole new edition coming out with text on the tiles, and hopefully people are happy with it. I hope, Cole, that you're right. I hope that other people choose this product for that as part of that, that like Gabriel Ramos is the reason why people play it first, and then Andrea Seifert is the reason why they keep on playing it, so to speak. I hope that you're right. I'm afraid, because of the Terraform Mars example making $3 million on their Kickstarter and being so successful, that there's going to be a large amount of people that don't care. And that's the tension that we're in.
Yeah. So sorry. Yeah, go.
Not at all. So I note that we are approaching the point when we said we were going to wrap up. So we only have a couple of minutes. So what I was hoping to end with is we've had a lot of interesting discussion, and I'm so grateful for each of you and all of the unique perspectives that you've brought. I think maybe what would be helpful for me, and going by some of the comments, what would be helpful for some of the other people who are watching this panel or will watch it in the future, is what do we do? What steps can we take as individuals? We have critics here, we have educators, we have artists, we have publishers, we have people who are involved in this process. What are we going to do? And let me offer here's what I'm going to do. I run a very small, I don't know how big it is actually. I run a small board game review site called SpaceBiff. And my personal motto for everything that I do in my life is if something is worth doing, it's worth doing badly. Because otherwise it just doesn't get done. I write fiction that I don't share with anybody. I wrote a short story actually about AI art that I think 5 people have read, but I did it. It's something that I created. I'm really pleased that I have created it. The same goes for my website. The whole reason I began writing it is because the sort of thing that I wanted to see in the board game sphere in terms of criticism, and elevating board games as art, as talking about board games as things that could be taken seriously. No one was really doing it the way that I wanted to do it. And so I started doing it badly. And that's what I'm going to keep doing, is I am going to keep not only making board game reviews and making my own art as badly as I can, and trying to get better. I am also going to continue to write about games that are doing it badly. To give one of my favorite examples from last year is Amabel Holland did a little freebie game that I think actually is only for sale right now. And this is not a marketing plug, but it's called Watch Out, That's a Dracula. And she illustrated the game herself, and it's like MS Paint art. And the art is not good by anyone's standards. And it's utterly perfect for that game because it's bad art that works in the context of that game. And I think this is a wonderful game. The art is incredibly charming, and it is a millionth as good or as detailed as Amabel could have plugged in a prompt into an AI art generator and gotten something way better, quote unquote. But I don't think it would have worked for the tone, the lighthearted tone, the satirical tone, the silly social space that game engenders. And so for what am I going to do is I'm going to continue to write about human created products that speak to me. Because an AI, I have yet to see an AI produce something that is based on decisions and trying to speak to something. I actually suspect that a machine cannot. And if it can, we should be having a very different conversation about personhood. So that's what I'm going to be doing. In our closing minutes, I would just like to open up this question, whether to our commenters or to my fellow members of the panel. What do you intend to do to help the situation, whether it's from the content creation side, the artistic side, or the publishing side?
So I think a lot about this because when I'm frustrated with something, I remind myself, okay, so you can complain about it, which is fine, and you should speak up about things that you don't like. However, all you can really control is what you're putting out into the world and what you're choosing to make. And so for me, that means that I need to make really conscious decisions about what I'm making going forward on all fronts. So I owe it to games and gaming as I want our community to be, to deny coverage to games that are using generative AI in their art, except maybe to flag that it's happening in like a news segment or something at some point. I also owe it to myself, to my viewers in our community, to cover and elevate games that I think need it. Not that I'm like the biggest show in town or anything, but when I publish a review, I'm giving attention, I'm giving light to something that I think needs it for one reason or another. And so I have a lot of choices to make in terms of what games I'm giving my time to, what designers and artists I'm giving my time to. That's true of my podcast as well. I want to be having conversations that mean something to me and then hopefully to others as well. And I think that in the long run, I'm a game designer now. I will refuse to publish with somebody who would use AI art on something that I contributed to, because I find that unimaginably gross. And I think in terms of things that I make, I think I owe everybody else what I demand, which is that I want gaming to be communicative. I want it to be about conversations between people where we are creating experiences for each other and commenting on the experiences that we had with each other's work. And that means that the things that I make have to be better than content. And that means that things I give my attention and my love to also need to be implicitly better than content. And I think that that's easy to do in this current era of gaming. So I need to be showing my love where it needs to be.
I get into a lot, probably too many online conversations about like everything, everything interesting. So I guess just in terms of my ongoing kind of online presence and talking with the people, a thread to pick up from earlier in the conversation in terms of the words we use and how we talk about artificial intelligence and learning and training and all that kind of stuff. Computers are doing something fundamentally different than what humans do. Computers do not learn, quote unquote, as humans learn, and it is as kind of a thought crime to use the same words for those things. We haven't even developed the language to model what computers are doing and to distinguish it from what humans do. I got into a very long, too long argument with one person, and I think the fundamental thing where we were like not matching up on it all was this person was saying computers learn just like humans, and like there should not be computers have quote unquote a right to learn, and therefore computers should be as free to steal from, borrow, whatever word you want to use, as humans do, that there's no fundamental difference. And I think there is a world of difference. And in terms of like what am I going to do for my online presence, I'm going to push back against like that flattening, equalizing language. You cannot say that a dog pisses and then a human pisses and therefore a human is like a dog. These are not things. This is not, it's so reductive of human processing. And like if we reduce the human to that, if we reduce art to content, then yeah, AI will catch up. Well, we've only done that because we've reduced the human. So I in my online choice, in my language, in my content, I'm going to my content, right? I'm going to kind of center that. And the other thing is getting to the point about credit, always arguing for artists to get work, artists to get credit for their work, advocating and platforming people, and really shouting out when someone does and anyone does a creative thing, and give them their love, give them the credit, whether it's art, whether it's a piece like Liz was saying. Everybody wants to get platforming on my channel, no matter what, small project, big project, or whatever, and use their name, say their name, because there's something human about that. And I'm going to have an absolute and the more I learn about this, the more I was like, okay, no, this is the what I need to do. I need to center the human, and to center human names, and to center and raise up what we can do over and above whatever we're talking about. So that's all very abstract, but like, so I guess I'm kind of can keep on doing what I'm doing, but like really honing and clarifying a lot of things.
Well, I'll echoing these thoughts. In my own practice, there isn't really a space for generated images. It doesn't even occur to me to use them. I don't know why someone would do that. At the same time, I can recognize that especially when you're starting in design, you have a way that you want something to look, and that way is probably derivative. Often it is for first designers. I'm still going to look at your prototype, even if it's bedecked in whatever weird mid-journey thing you've generated. I'll still look at it, but I don't see a place for it either from a commercial sense or an ethical sense, or a sense of artistic practice in my own publishing. And I think going from underlining what Jason said, I think it's important to say the names of the people who contribute to projects. That's true of the designers, that's true of the artists on a project, it's true of the graphic designers, it's true of the editors, it's true of the playtesters. Games are human endeavors, and the people who make them should be recognized for the many things that they bring. This industry has a problem more broad than art with showing the labor of the game and who's making it. And that is true of the creative staffs that build the games. It's also true of the hands that put the games in boxes. And this is a place where there's a lot of improvement can be made. And hopefully folks who are finding themselves animated by this discussion of art will also care about it when we get into the other discussions of the labor of games that are certainly on the horizon. At least I'd hope so.
I'd just add a final flippant comment to all this. Is like, I think making things with people is the best. I just think it's the best. I think you rub up against human beings and you come up against ideas that challenge your own. You realize that you are not as good as you think you are. You realize you are better in some ways. You realize that you're inadequate in other ways. Whatever. I just think there is a great degree of growth that can happen by trying to make something with someone else. And if that thing is abstract and difficult, I just don't think that we gain that much unless you are a huge commercial endeavor, in which I can't speak to those people. Like, if you want to make things very quickly and very efficiently, then fine. That is fine. It's fine. But I think that the greatest joys in life are found rubbing up against other people. You know? I think, yeah. Whoa.
Oh my goodness. Well, thank you so much, everybody, for your colorful anecdotes and for your commitment to making our hobby better. I appreciate it, all of you so much. Harold, I don't know how to end, so play us out.
Thanks, Dan. What a fantastic gathering of people. I want to thank everybody. Jason, Pablo, Liz, Cole, of course, Dan. Great to meet several of you for the first time. And what a fantastic panel for the SD-HistCon. A couple of things come to mind that I will tell you we will think about at SD-Hist. The first is that I think it's important that the creation of AI needs to be done in an ethical manner. And so stealing stuff from other people is not a good start for AI. And I don't expect that it will be the future of AI, but who knows? And the second one is, I think it's important for all of us to ensure, and this is really the charge of SD-HistCon, is to work to ensure that the community of people that make games, and specifically for us, historical games, and when I say make games, that includes designers, it includes art, it includes copyright editors, it includes everyone that participates in the process, is a fairly diversified group. And I don't mean fairly in a small increment. I mean reasonably reflective of our community. And I think, we can't lose that in this process, right? And if we let AI take over the processes, we will lose that completely. So thanks again to all of you, and look forward to seeing some of you at the SD-HistCon. Pablo and Jason, we'll see you at a future SD-HistCon, I'm sure.
Absolutely.